Headed right over to our Lewis Automotive hotline is Brett Dolan, who drove to the wrong Walmart. But I do appreciate that. We got two of them in Fayetteville. We're live at the Walmart on Mall Avenue. He went to the one on MLK. So you don't see the ESPN set, unfortunately, Brett. But, hey, I think we're here in a couple weeks, so come here in 2 weeks.
I might. I've heard you talk about this all morning, so I thought I might surprise you guys. And I sort of listen, but I just don't completely listen to your location. So instead, we'll do it the old-fashioned way.
It hits when you sit at the Sports Center desk. It's just funny though, because Ty earlier said I was going to be in my element. This is about as anti of my element as it gets because I am I am not a TV guy. I know you've been on TV a heck of a lot more, and you've been on MLB Network of late. But I mean, it hits when you see that Sports Center logo, and you got this desk right here in front of you, and and maybe we're getting back to old school Sports Center a little bit with you see one of Rich Eisen's episodes last week.
Yeah, maybe. No, I'm with you. You are anti-TV, Phil. You're definitely radio, but this gives you a little vibe, a little feel. So it looks like a nice location for you guys.
Hey, before we get into talking a little about some of the games this week, an opening week, what's your before the season gets going? If somebody said, "Hey, who's the best college football conference?" Is it the Big Ten now? If Penn State wins the national title 100%, I think the Big Ten would be considered to be better than the SEC. And I know we're an SEC country, but it seemed like the consensus there for a while was it was the SEC, the Big Ten, and then everybody else. Is it the Big Ten, then the SEC now?
Well, I think it's a great argument, Matt, and I think there's probably two layers to that, and it's the old-fashioned argument. Is it depth of teams or is it championship teams? And clearly the Big Ten has had championship teams, even though the SEC I still think has probably a depth of better overall players. But if you're talking about winning the big prize, and I'm with you, I think Penn State, for the first time ever, at least under James Franklin, has a legitimate shot of being in that, and then they would kind of win that argument, I guess, over the last few years. So, we shall see. I think there's probably a handful of teams at the bottom of the Big Ten, if you play them on your schedule, that might be a little bit easier to win games than the bottom of the SEC. But, that doesn't factor into the Michigan and Ohio State success because they were able to go into this extended playoff we've had and win multiple games and win titles.
Who's been better for the conference, Texas and Oklahoma coming into the SEC or Oregon and USC going into the Big Ten?
That's interesting, too. I got to believe it's going to be Texas and Oklahoma. I think what the argument for the Big Ten is just the size and scope of the league. And I did 4 games last year on the West Coast, and, you're sitting there, Oregon, Washington, you're like, how in the hell is this a Big Ten game? Or UCLA, USC, and yet it's expanded the scope and the reach. And I think what's interesting is when you go to Oregon and you go to California, there's a little more Big Ten discussion. You watch the Big Ten, and it becomes a little more relevant, even though I think it's still got years, maybe decades to go. But what Texas did last year, I think, I forget the number, but I think when their baseball team won the SEC championship regular season, that was like 8 or 9 championships they won, and football should be around for quite some time. So I think that addition right now is better, but it's just changed everything in the Big Ten with the geography with those new schools.
So I know, too, like the culture fits from all of those schools into the Big Ten, but, and look, USC's got this amazing history and all of that, but, UCLA maybe not so much, but it still feels like in the city and even in the state that they're in, they're still way down on the list. Like, Michigan football is the biggest thing that happens at this time of the year in the state of Michigan. And the Lions are kind of like Johnny-come-lately right now, so everybody's gotten into them then. It's the same in Ohio. You got Bengals fans, you got Browns fans. Ohio State is the biggest thing. You don't see that, I think, with at least the Los Angeles schools. Like Oregon, yes, I think you do. Washington, no, that's a Seattle Seahawks town. That's not necessarily a Huskies town. I feel differently at least I'd feel differently about Michigan and about Ohio State.
It's clearly different, and there's no doubt. And I do think there's a little more college conversation in those markets because the Pac-12, and I hated to see its history go. It just didn't have anything beyond the region. I think there's a ton of people that live in those areas that are from Michigan and Ohio State, and I think that's helped. But there's no doubt it's a different animal when you're talking about the pro towns, and even just a different vibe on the West Coast than it is when we get used to what we see on a regular basis in the SEC, or even what I think is the Big Ten when you talk about some of the old ones like Ohio State and Michigan and on down the line.
So let me ask you this question, though, about the quality of the game that you're watching. In the SEC game notes, and I guess you still have to count them up from this year because the 53-man rosters were just released yesterday, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's the same. There were more SEC players in the NFL last year than any other conference. And, man, you see the same thing in the NBA. By far, you see that in Major League Baseball. So does that have anything to do with how you view the quality of the league, or is it just about what they do while they're in college?
Well, it's a multi-layered argument. I would say the best talent of high school football is in the South, so the SEC should be getting the best volume of recruits. And it doesn't mean there aren't talented players in Michigan and Illinois and Pennsylvania. There are. It's just a numbers game, maybe similar to what you guys were talking about earlier with Arkansas's in-state recruits. It's just strictly a numbers game. I mean, the conversation earlier about more good high school players in Houston than the entire state of Arkansas, you could carve Houston into four components, and there would be more in one of those four components than there would be in the state. So it's just a volume of talent, I think, and I don't think that's going to change. Now, we've seen it, Phil, in baseball where there are plenty of players from California when Ryder Helfrich and Gabe Gackle come this way, leaving their region because they want to be a part of it. And I think that's also an element. But I do think the Big Ten isn't necessarily that far behind from a football standpoint and getting people from outside the region, because going to Michigan Stadium or the Horseshoe is not a deep fall off from some of the atmospheres we see, though, in the SEC.
Hey, Brett, who should be on upset alert? Should Notre Dame, I know they play Sunday, Virginia Tech going to South Carolina, even Boise State, who plays Thursday. I guess that'd be today, playing South Florida. Do you have a team this weekend? That's one of the coolest things about college football is there's going to be upsets every single weekend. Who should be on upset alert this weekend?
And the other part that's fun is we haven't seen them play 2 or 3 meaningless games like we do in the NFL, or just to kind of get a little sense of what the newcomers look like. I'm curious with Notre Dame, and it's obviously because of them coming to play Arkansas in a few weeks, but it's just the freshman quarterback, Matt, with Carr. I just don't know if we have a good sense on what Notre Dame is. And this is a team that has been extremely good in recent years with winning the turnover battles and, kind of winning in the margins, so to speak. Not necessarily explosive, but really good in a lot of facets. It's a different animal playing at Miami on a humid night in August, and it's also, that might even be September 1st, but also running in a new quarterback there. And while that's not the type of atmosphere Notre Dame would have seen last year in College Station at Texas A&M, it's still pretty feisty. The Miami fans don't show up every single game, but they do show up for some big games. And between that crowd and the humidity and a new freshman quarterback, I would be really leery to see what it looks like from Notre Dame. And obviously Carson Beck's had some ups and downs too, but he has a lot more tread off his tires than does Carr.
That's what I was going to ask you next. I know you work a little bit with Gino Torretta, Miami Hurricane. What is his thoughts on Carson Beck? Is he a guy? I think Cam Ward's a better quarterback than Carson Beck, their last year quarterback. But Carson Beck, he's a proven winner. How do you see his tenure going down there in Miami?
No, it's a fascinating conversation because I was reminded a couple of days ago, we talk a lot about Garrett Nussmeier and about his NFL potential, and he is prone to some mistakes. Well, I think he threw, let's say, 12 interceptions last year. I think Beck threw 12 interceptions. We really harped on Carson Beck's mistakes and his inconsistency, so to speak, but maybe it isn't even that much off, at least numbers-wise, from some of the guys we consider really good. I know Klubnik's numbers were better than Nussmeier, but usually it's Nussmeier and Klubnik. There's elements of Carson Beck's game that don't thrill me, but again, he has played a lot of college football, and I think from what the Miami people have said, he's acclimated to their offense fairly quickly. He's also been able to kind of pick up their ideas or their systems. So we'll see. I think he needs to prove it to me before I jump on the bandwagon. But when Miami got him, I think it was a case where there were not a lot of other options out there, and they had so much success bringing in Cam Ward with that one-hit wonder that I think they want to see if they can run it back and do something similar with another experienced quarterback in Beck.
Brett's got Florida, Miami near the end of the month. That's September 20th. I want to ask about Florida and DJ Lagway specifically because you look at Alabama, Georgia. They have first-year starters, and yet they're ranked ahead of Florida basically because of the overall strength of their roster. But you look at Florida, and I feel maybe a little bit differently about that, maybe the opposite. So much of their season relies on DJ Lagway and showing that the good moments from last year can mushroom into a tremendous sophomore season, that he can stay healthy. How much of Florida's success this year has to do with DJ Lagway, where it feels like a couple of the other teams in the SEC, it doesn't necessarily feel like they're relying on the quarterback to win them a lot of games?
It's funny because I think there's been a very slow growth in that Florida program, and I think their talent has to be better than it was a couple of years ago. But having said that, I still believe Lagway is crucial. And, when you look at all the talented quarterbacks that left this conference last year and very few big-name returners, so to speak, he's one of those guys that we know about but hasn't played a lot, but obviously has a tremendous amount of ability. I have no rooting interest in the Florida Gators situation, but it intrigues me because there were a lot of people that wanted Napier and that staff gone with a couple of ugly losses in recent years, and yet they keep hanging around and they keep kind of finding a way to try and build this program and be relevant. But I really don't believe they want to play as much at all of this season without Lagway, because I think he's the difference between a possibility of maybe a breakthrough type of year, whatever that looks like, if that's 9-ish wins, or a team that's kind of stuck around that 5 to 7, 8 plateau, and that's where they really don't want to be. They want to show some progress, and I think Lagway's a huge part of it.
Who's the player this year that would be like the Johnny Manziel, or anybody, like the most exciting player? Is it Jeremiah Smith, the receiver from Ohio State? Who's the guy that you would like, I would pay money to watch this football player play?
Well, I think Smith's definitely one of those. I know we've seen in recent years, at least early last year with Ohio State, the inability sometimes to get big receivers the football, and obviously teams have game planned or will against Jeremiah Smith and others. I think from an exciting standpoint, Lenora Sellers might be one of those guys that I want to see a couple of times. And obviously he doesn't play on the stage that Ohio State does, but someone who I think can really captivate me for a couple of hours of watching football. So he may be one of those that I'll look at this year and see if he can kind of pull me in.
Brett, you're from Big Ten country, being from Iowa. We've decided the Big Ten has too many trophy games, and you get to do one of them. Or is there a trophy for Cy Hawk?
Yeah, the Cy Hawk Trophy. It is the ugliest trophy you'll ever see. But don't you dare come after Floyd of Rosedale, because that is the best. I heard you teetering on the edge of talking about the Floyd of Rosedale Trophy, but that is the best.
The Floyd Rosedale Trophy is an American college football rivalry. The Floyd of Rosedale, introduced in 1935 as a bronze trophy in the shape of a pig, which is awarded to the winner of the game. Why is it between... You don't have to answer these questions, but I feel like we need to have... The next trophy that Basil comes up with has to have
Well, the shape of a pig is an Arkansas Razorback. We already got one every week. I like it.
Well, you do, but there's something about playing for a bronze pig when you're from the agricultural area of the country. You could run from what makes you popular, or you could just embrace it, and they just embrace it. And Hayden Fry always used to say he fed it better in the off season than the Minnesota coaches did. But it's part of the tradition of college football, and that thing's been around for decades and decades and decades.
That's how the Hatfields and McCoys started feuding. We got it going on.
But I love this broken chair trophy. It's the craziest thing that should have been sponsored by Bobby Knight, for crying out loud.
Yeah, sometimes I think we try too hard, right? You can't buy tradition. It just has to occur over time. Iowa and Nebraska play for an award, and I don't think that'll ever mean much because it was just kind of created and fabricated. It's not something that's been around for decades, like, the old Oaken Bucket and some of those Paul Bunyan's axe and some of those incredible Big Ten awards that look like they've been in somebody's closet for about 80 years. But they're fun. I like them.
I'll believe a football trophy shouldn't be broken bits of chair. It should be broken bits of teeth. I mean, come on.
We can agree with that. Yeah. No, we can agree with that.
You don't always win your first bet. That's why MyBookie has you covered. Use our code HOGS, H-O-G-S, and your first bet up to $500 is fully covered. If your pick doesn't hit, you get it right back with our Bet Back bonus. Go to mybookie.ag and use the code HOGS to claim your Bet Back bonus. MyBookie's where bettors win together, because bragging's good, but cashing in is better. And your first bet is fully covered. Use our code HOGS.
Got a little jingle